Hello, guten Tag, und grüß Gott. Newswit here. Well, it's been a little while since my last video broadcast. Of course, it's not a broadcast, it's just a video film that I make on my iPhone. But it's been since about February, and today is April the 2nd, 2021. It's a Saturday. Of course, in Southern California, it's a wonderful day. Naturally, it's sunny, maybe a little overcast. We're within about a mile of the beach, and so the weather is it varies a lot between 72 and 74 degrees year-round. I'm exaggerating a bit, but it's really, in terms of the weather, it's pretty much like the Mediterranean, I think. Anyway, people, when they come here and visit, they love it. So I just wanted to once again explain why I use the phraseology in my greeting, and guten Tag, hello, and so forth. Well, guten Tag, of course, means good day in German, and grüß Gott is kind of an interesting greeting, primarily in southern Germany, in the Schwabenland, because at the time that I grew up, we used to, when you walk past an adult, tip your hat and say, grüß Gott. And it was really important to also tip your hat. And so, grüß Gott. If you just literally translate it, what it means is greet God. But no, it's really like, more like, if the meaning is more like, I acknowledge you, fellow human, and may God bless you. So it's that kind of thing. Okay, the historical calendar, and boy, was that thick. Today is April the 2nd, and let's see what it says here. Oh, God. Jury convicts mob boss John Gotti of murder. Okay. Well, I think he spent the rest of his days in a jail, if I'm not mistaken. And the reason you saw me look away is because my wife, Marge, is recovering from very, very severe back surgery right here, and she cannot walk up the stairs right now to our bedroom, so she is actually resting comfortably here in the living room, her temporary quarters. They say for like 5 or 6 months, or maybe 7 months, or something like that. Isn't that right, Mom?
Right.
There you go, see? So I picked out some things, that may be noteworthy on the historical calendar. And it said that in 1876, Alexander Graham Bell patents the telephone. We know about Watson, and so I need you, I want you. But anyway, so up until that time, it was Morse code, basically, and telegraph. But it wasn't like we couldn't communicate. It was a huge step, when you could actually talk to somebody. In 1587, Mary, Queen of Scots, is beheaded. Why do I think that's important? Well, beheading still goes on nowadays, and all over whatever ISIS controls in terms of the Middle East and who knows where else. But that was the death penalty de jure, back in the 16th century. Anyway, and Mary was a bit of an asshole, She wanted to wanted to turn England back into a Catholic nation, and so she became Queen of Scots. They liked her and kept raising an army against Elizabeth. Finally, Elizabeth, put her in jail and didn't know what to do with her for about 8 years. She was languishing in jail. And then probably, at that point, maybe skin and bones and who knows what, they beheaded her, and so the thing was over. In 1994, thieves steal the Edward Munch scream. Imagine that. And they wanted to ransom it for $1 million. And of course, they found him, and they kind of figured out what it was. But, oddly, the guys actually got away with it because when the Brits went to get him, Scotland Yard went to get him, they didn't have the right authority, to go to the place where they were. They did find the scream. Of course, it's back in the Louvre, I think, or whatever. And but the guys got off because on a technicality. In 1970, 5 members of Chicago 7 are sentenced. You know, I was in Chicago at that time, and actually I had already left Chicago, but I was totally aware of this because the events happened in Chicago during the election in 1968, and I had just left. You know, I voted for Nixon at that time and then took off for California. And, the hippies were really raising hell in Chicago, and Chicago police came down on them hard. Anyway, so these guys and their attorneys, were real assholes in court, not from their perspective, of course, but, when I look at this right now, they raised all kinds of hell and used this court proceedings because there was kind of national attention as a platform, to air their grievances against Nixon and the Vietnam War and who knows whatnot, was, all of that, with Bobby Seale was a big deal. Actually, some of them went to prison for a little while. Then all of that was expunged because they were convicted for rioting, and the courts of appeal, got rid of all that stuff, and so. So, rioting is now okay, huh? You don't, and if you don't have the money, to be bailed out for rioting, then you can always ask, our friends in Hollywood to bail you out, It's a good thing, I guess. But in 1879, Albert Einstein was born in the city of Ulm, and I'd forgotten about that because we never made a big deal of where Einstein was born. Of course, Einstein was a huge deal all over the world, But Ulm, was only like, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 kilometers from where I lived. And so I just picked that up as an interesting little factoid, 1879. But in 1852, Wells Fargo started shipping and a banking company. So it was Mr. Wells and Mr. Fargo that did that, and that we still have Wells Fargo today. And I remember as a kid, reading stories, about the Old West. We were fascinated in Germany with the Old West, as children. It was just, cowboys and Indians and evildoers and headless horsemen. Who knows? It was a big deal in when I grew up. In any case. So I knew about Wells Fargo ever since I knew how to read, because it was something, that Wells Fargo's overland stagecoach. Oh, man, that was something because, the climax always was, when, they got held up and throw me that strong box, and, the bandits, would always lurk around the corner someplace. And the women would be, I don't know, were they happy about the bandits? Who knows? They had an adventure because these were women and people traveling from back east, New York and so on, to the west. And so they thought this was probably a normal thing to be held up. And if they arrived someplace without being held up, they were probably sorry about that, saying, God, did we miss out on something? But nowadays, you can go to Columbia, California, get on a stagecoach and be held up. Isn't that cool, huh? So there you go. Let's see. 1975, Ethiopia abolishes the monarchy after 3,000 years. I thought that was kind of noteworthy, because the Brits are always wrestling with the fact, that, hey, do we really need the monarchy and so on, But Ethiopia, I remember probably the last monarch, which was Haile Selassie, and they had the Italians helping them fight against I don't know, some of their neighboring tribes or whatever. But Ethiopia, so they got rid of the monarchy, and it promptly steeped them into poverty. I still remember back in the 1980s how the Ethiopians were shown to be starving, and there were people saying, oh man, we're delivering all this food, and there were piles of food, but you had them, they were too weak to find the place where they dropped the food, and Ethiopians looked awfully pitiful. So you do away with the monarchy, you do away with infrastructure, you do away with organization, and sometimes it goes astray. So in 1982, and I didn't know that, the British Parliament approves the Canada Act. Now you might ask, what is the Canada Act? Well, basically, Canada asked to take the constitutional powers away from Britain and be able to, so they can modify and with the Constitution without the approval of the Queen. Now, they still remain part of the empire, but not the empire, the Commonwealth. And so they still recognize the Queen as head of state, like New Zealand, Australia, and I don't know, some others, and Canada included. But it was actually Canada became independent quite a long time ago, which was in like 1867 they gained their independence. And, where the Brits voted, say, hey, there's America, we lost that colony, so Canada may as well be their own state as well. So that takes me up to today, and kind of just briefly talking about events of the day. And I think the most significant event is that, we're having something like 25% of the people in the United States have already received the vaccine. So we're kind of working through this. And when we went for a birthday dinner for Marge, my wife, yesterday, it wasn't birthday dinner, it was birthday lunch. We noticed that in the restaurant, business was pretty much like normal, wasn't it, Mom?
Yep.
It was, there was social distancing, and all of the help, wore the mask. We had to wear a mask going in, and then, but once you were at the table, everybody took, the masks off, raised their glass of wine, and it was all good. So, and, of course, my favorite, the Pétrole sole, was wonderful, and Marge loves the French dip. What is that called? Roast beef or whatever. Anyway, it was a good time. So the pandemic, from our perspective, is kind of winding down quite a bit. Of course, if Trump had been the president, it would be a huge deal. We'd be killing millions. But nobody talks about it now, about how many people are dying or whether it's, even a problem anymore. Because, the press basically controls what we're to think. And a lot of people still buy into it, but I think they're losing some of their footing because the internet is also putting stuff out there. But boy, you got to be careful with what's going on the internet as well. And your sources are really, really important. They got to be reliable. But anyway, the events of the day. So the pandemic is kind of waning since even back in February when I did my last video. And by the way, that video was, I think, on my grandparents, the Schlesners, if I'm not mistaken. So today I plan to do a video of what I remember about how it came to pass that we came to America from Germany. And my brother John, who was born here in the United States, asked that question, and it's a good one. It's a good one, and I hope I can do this justice. So, I need to mention just one more thing, and that is a container ship with almost 20,000 large containers, over maybe a couple of $1 billion worth of goods. Ran aground in a Suez Canal and was kind of sideways and halted traffic for 6 days. Oh my God. So what I find interesting about that is, shit happens and, you can run a thing aground, but the excuse of why it ran aground says, a sandstorm, pushed. Well, that's kind of bullshit from my perspective because, yeah, there was a sandstorm and there was sandstorm, but there's ships going through there every 5 or 6 minutes from one to the other, and it's this one that actually got stuck on the sand. So we won't know for a long time, what happened because nobody's talking about the captain, and that's kind of screwy a little bit because the captain is in charge of it, and if anybody's in fault, it's the guy that's in charge, and who was the guy in charge? Yeah, that's not really discussed, which is interesting. So, again, is the press is, I sound like a conspiracy theorist, but the press is again in charge of, what we know and what we think. And so, what if, I'm just putting this out there and I don't know the facts, but what the hell? What if, we were just about ready to announce the first female captain of a big container ship, has been inaugurated and given the power, to run that big container ship, all the way through Suez Canal and over to India and I don't know where else, China. Well, nobody's saying that. In fact, nobody's saying anything about the captain. And, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that the captain fucked up big time, So whoever that was, there it is. Well, anyway, so they needed the help of the moon to get it out because all the dredging machines couldn't move enough sand to get it unstuck. And all of the tugboats, I don't know, they had some like 30 tugboats pulling on the damn thing, But the moon unstuck it because they happened to have a supermoon, and, the tide that normally was a couple of feet higher, than normally, or maybe a foot and a half. And that was just enough to lift that darn ship up. And they didn't have to unload it. And so life is good again, except now, who knows if there are animals stuck in some of those ships and so forth, and it takes 3 weeks longer to get to wherever they're going because, 6 days of the canal closure. But, you got to reorganize everything. Everybody's got to get back in line and who is first and who is next and who knows. I mean, it's got to be a logistical nightmare. Anyway, so those were the events of today. And of course, the big event was yesterday was my wife's Marge's birthday. Yay! Anyway, so how did we get to the United States? Well, the Krieger family, which were called the Kragers at the time, had to leave our home in Radom, Poland. That's where my dad had his business, and that's where we made our living at the time. Even though my parents, both of them, were born in a town that is in Polish for me, a little bit unpronounceable, but it's like Skierz or something like that. But it was in the Wategau and was part of Prussia at one time. And we called it Gurnau, because that's, and when the Germans invaded, it became Gurnau again. Well, the thing is that Germans were not welcome in Poland or Russia, anywhere in the East. And they were basically told, mostly by the Russians and everybody else, get the frig out of there. And so we did, okay? So we left everything, that we had. My dad boxed up some stuff that he wanted to take, and that charged my mom with taking it. Poor mom. But she was a smart lady, and she figured it out, and she brought the stuff ultimately to West Germany. And the idea was, where do we get out to? Well, we go to the American sector in Germany, and there was a rumor, or maybe part of our family, that my dad was always talking about, well, originally, some of our family came from the area of Stuttgart, And so he was kind of drawn to that. And he also had a friend, that lived near Stuttgart. And so we settled in a town called Marbach. And that was in springtime of 1946, if I'm not mistaken, because the winter of 45 was horrible, So I lived through that. It was terrible. And so we came to Marbach and we were called Flüchtlinge. which means refugees, basically. And so my parents spoke High German, and everybody in Marwa spoke Schwäbisch. And, while we made a good living there ultimately, in about 4 or 5 years when things got better and, the infrastructure kind of returned. My dad had a really good job, and I became apprentice to the same company that he worked for, which was Hermann Fauto Welsfres Maschinenfabrik in Ludwigsburg. And he was a group leader, of manufacturing and finishing off gear hobbing equipment, gear hobbing machines. Then he'd go on trips to set them up for different companies and so on. So anyway, life was pretty good. We were thinking about, maybe we've got enough money to build a house or something like that. And we lived in an apartment in Marbach at the time. So, but here was the kicker, is my parents, being these Flüchtlinge or refugees, never really felt that they fit in. First of all, they spoke High German, and, as I said, the people spoke Schwäbisch. And as children, Walter and I, and subsequently Heidi, we could speak Schwäbisch, just as good as the natives. In fact, the children, we couldn't see the difference between them. And my dad, always was a little grimacing, when I came home and I started with my Schwäbisch drawl and dialect, he said, hold on. But here's what happened is when we ultimately came to America, I pretty much forgot my Swabian. I can still speak it a little bit because we visited and so forth. And so, the people in the stores, they recognized me as being a properly accented local, but I no longer had the vocabulary, to kind of throw around, that they did. So I always told them to slow down a little bit. I haven't been here in 40 years, that kind of thing. Anyway, so they never felt at home, and they planned to emigrate and make a new home in America because they couldn't go back. There was no way back to Radom or Gurna or anything like that. So they had to go forward. And so it was between them, we're doing okay here, but maybe we can do a hell of a lot better in America. So the attraction of America, like it is now for everybody here, was pretty much the same then. But being German was a problem because, you could have been a bad guy, what I mean, doing something during the war. So we started the process of trying to emigrate. Probably we came in 1956 and we started it in about 1950 or so. So it was like 4 years after we came to Marbach. We basically wanted to figure out how to go to America, and there was no way to do this for a German at the time, unless you were part of Werner von Braun's rocketry stuff. Then it was easy. They just brought you over, took you to Mexico, brought you papers, came back in on the paperclip. Project Paperclip, and everything was stamped, and all of a sudden, there you are, a legal immigrant into America. Well, that didn't work for the rest of the populace. So my parents even toyed with the idea of emigrating to Canada, and because it was supposed to be a little bit easier to get there, and then somehow work our way from Canada into the United States. So that was actually on the table, for a while, because I remember my dad was studying seeds and grains and agricultural information because he thought that the Canadians really wanted farmers, and so if you knew something about farming, then maybe you could get permission to go into the country. So he studied farming. Of course, he's a tool and die maker, but a smart one, so here you go. Anyway, every time that we made some sort of an application, either to the consulate in the Canadian consulate or the American consulate, it was not so much, So there were several turndowns all the time, okay? And we darn near gave up. But my dad worked with a guy who he befriended by the name of Beer. And Klaus Beer, his son, and I became just as good friends as my dad did with his dad. So our families started to connect. So Klaus Beer's family was from somewhere in Czechoslovakia, well, the Sudetenland, I mean, they were Germans, but they were Catholic. And we were Protestant. And the Beer said, hey, I think we're going to get to go to America. And my dad's ears, of course, perked up. How? And he said, well, we have this organization for Catholics called Caritas. Caritas, I don't know what but C stands for Catholic something, And so my dad started to look at that and said, maybe the Lutherans have something like this. And sure as hell they did. There was Lutheran World Federation, which was the LWF. And what they did is they helped refugees to make a place in America. How neat is that? So as it turned out, that there were Americans out there in the 1950s that would sponsor families, refugee families, to make a life in their community. And that's what happened to us. But there was a prerequisite. First of all, you couldn't be a burden on the society. Back in the 50s, it was a whole different story. So my dad had to, in order to go through with the application process, he had to apply I remember one of the companies that he applied to, Barbara Coleman, who made gear hobbing machines for the United States. He applied for a job there, and they were absolutely delighted to get this German super craftsman to come. So he had letters, of that, as soon as he comes to the United States, he has jobs. He had it from several companies, and I can't remember the rest of them. But so there was this process. And nevertheless, even from that very beginning of recognizing that there was a way, through the Lutheran World Federation to come to America, it took 4 years. Because, at that time, I can't remember exactly what it was called, but it was not the CIA, but it was some sort of it was a precursor to the CIA that was born out of the military and the occupation military in Western Europe that did all of the examinations, and they looked at it, make sure that no Nazis slipped into the United States and that kind of stuff. And, anybody that had anything to do with a concentration camp, so did something bad. So anyway, that process went on for approximately 4 years. So it was like from 1952 sometime till 1956, when on November 15th, we came to the United States in 1956. So that's basically what the process was. There are stories along with it. And of course, in 4 years, you can dream about America, about this. But there was also a certain kind of fear with my parents because there was no socialized medicine. We basically had free medical care because if you had a job in Germany, you had medical care. Of course, that was the same here in the United States because, through the company, wherever you worked, most likely you had medical care. But there was no official social security system, no Medicare or anything like that at the time. And that had us a little bit worried. Because if you were an independent businessman, for instance, in America during that time, and you or your spouse got sick or children and you had medical expenses, you could lose everything, So That wasn't possible in Germany, and I think most of Europe probably, because the Europeans kind of look at human rights, a little bit differently than we do. Human rights there include medical care. Anyway, so we there was a church called the Sand Prairie Lutheran Church, which decided to become our sponsor, and so we started to get correspondence from a guy by the name of Earl Irish, and he was a farmer in Green Valley, Illinois. Sorry about the phone. I should have thought about that, but there it is. Making noise. Anyway, we'll do that differently next time if I do that in this place again. But so Earl Urish started to write to us in English, and we got somebody to look at the English and translate it and so forth. So the Sand Prairie Lutheran Church decided to sponsor us. And so the process started, and we did not come over on a ship like a lot of them did, but we came over, through the airport in Munich, and our airplane was was the I don't know, some kind of a Douglas, DC something, prop job, called the Flying Tiger Lines. Yeah, the Flying Tiger Lines. I read about them later on, and evidently they hauled out refugees from all over the country, all over the world, and when there were trouble spots, the Flying Tigers would come in and rescue people. So we were kind of rescued by the Flying Tigers in Munich, Germany. And of course, I say that Munich because I'm far more fluent in English now than German, and it was München, München. I still remember sitting there with all the other refugees that wanted to go, and some of them had different languages. It wasn't just Germans. It was a conglomerate of people maybe from Hungary and so forth. Oh, they were all Germans, and some of them, our particular family, we were called the Reichsdeutsche because my parents were born before Poland took over the area that they were born in. So we were still part of Prussia at the time, so we were Reichsdeutsch. And then there was a difference between, the people of the Germans, the German citizens, which we were, and then Volksdeutsch, which were people that were of the German ethnicity, and they were all over the place. For instance, I think I talked about the Volga Germans in Russia, and they had to leave too, so, and, like the Czechs, from the Sudetenland, those Germans, they were ethnic Germans, but they were not Reichsdeutsch, because, they were born still when, like Klaus Beer's parents were still born, when there was no Sudetenland. It was called that after the Anschluss, when Germany just kind of walked in there, like Austria and so on, and reclaimed their territory that was at one time part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it was settled by Germans all over the place. Anyway, so I think this is pretty much a story. So we came to Green Valley, Illinois, and I tell you what, it was something. They had an apartment ready for us, when we came here, and so who was it that came? Okay, so it was my dad, my mom, it was me, the oldest, Walter, 5 years younger, Heidi, 5 years younger than he, and Peter. And Peter was, I think it was 3 or something like that. So, and then, of course, in 1957, John was born. And yeah, I haven't really done the math, but maybe mom got pregnant with John, while I was still in Germany. I don't know. Does that make him German or more German, ethnic German? I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, we didn't really know that mom was pregnant with John because it was a real surprise, It was kind of, and John, if you're listening to this, I was water skiing, with Walter, on Lake Peoria, when we heard, hey, you have a brother. That was so cool. But anyway, yeah. So we kind of plugged into the community, and Green Valley, they welcomed us. I personally was a little worried because I mean, after all, we lost the war. We were their enemy just what 10 years earlier. A decade earlier, and so. But there was no hostility. It turned out, that the people in Illinois there near Green Valley, the older ones were actually a lot of Germans there, a name like Weilich and I don't know, some others. They were, by the time we got there, they were all wealthy farmers, because Illinois was part of the Corn Belt. They used to grow a lot, part of the breadbasket of America. Anyway, do you have any questions, Mom, about what I just said?
No.
She does not. Okay. So, John, if you have any specific questions, and maybe I didn't do a really good job on this, but I tried my best. And, so I'll leave you with a thought again that we must infect the universe with us. And I'm so with Elon Musk on that. Auf Wiedersehen.